Namaste, Dhanavad Pranam. We are here again reading. We're here reading Hegel's Aesthetics in the introduction, and we're continuing from the second paragraph here. But now the further question arises of what Meyer opposes to Hertz's artistic principle. What does he prefer? In the first place, he deals only with the principle in the works of art of antiquity, which must, however, contain the definition of the beautiful as such. In this connection, he comes to speak of Mengs and Winckelmann's definition of beauty as the ideal, and says that he neither rejects this law of beauty or wholly accepts it. On the other hand, he has no hesitation in agreeing with the opinion of the enlightened judge of art, Goethe, since it is definitive and seems to be nearer solving the riddle. Goethe says the supreme principle of antiquity was the significant, but the supreme result of a successful treatment was the beautiful. So the note here says, the usual works of reference give no clue to the source of this quotation. Probably it comes from Meyer's book, see page 17 above. Okay. If we look more closely at what is this expression implies, we again find meaning in two things. One is the content, the thing, and two, the manner and mode of presentation. In a work of art, we begin with what is immediately presented to us, and only then ask what its meaning or content is. The former, the external appearance, has no immediate value for us. We assume behind it something inward, a meaning whereby the external appearance is endowed with the spirit. It is to this, its soul, that the external points. For an appearance that means something does not present itself to our minds, or what it is as external, but something else. Consider, for example, a symbol, and still more obviously a fable, the meaning of which is constituted by its moral and message. Indeed, any word hints at a meaning and counts for nothing in itself. Similarly, the spirit and the soul shine through the human eye, through a man's face, flesh, skin, through his whole figure. And here the meaning is always something wider than what shows itself in the immediate appearance. It is in this way that the work of art is to be significant and not appear exhausted by these lines, curves, surfaces, carvings, hollowings in the stone, these colors, notes, word sounds, or whatever other material is used. On the contrary, it should disclose an inner life, feeling, soul, a content and spirit, which is just what we call the significance of a work of art. With this demand for meaningfulness in a work of art, therefore, little is said that goes beyond or is different from Hertz's principle of the characteristic. According to this view, to sum up, we have characterized as the elements of the beautiful something inward, a content, and something outward which signifies that content. The inner shines in the outer and makes itself known through the outer, since the outer points away from itself to the inner, but we cannot go further into detail. This earlier manner of theorizing has, after all, been already violently cast aside in Germany, along with those practical rules, principally owing to the appearance of genuinely living poetry. The right of genius, its works and their effects, have been made to prevail against the presumptions of those legalisms and the watery wastes of theories. from this foundation of a genuine spiritual art and the sympathy it has received and its widespread influence, there has sprung a receptivity for and freedom to enjoy and recognize great works of art which have long been available, whether those of the modern world or the Middle Ages, or even the wholly foreign peoples in the past, e.g. the Indian. These works, because of their age or foreign nationality, have of course something strange about them for us, but they have a content which outsoars their foreignness and is common to all mankind. And only by the prejudice of theory could they be stamped as products of a barbarous and bad taste. This general recognition of works of art which lie outside the circle and forms which were the principal basis for the abstractions of theory has in the first place led to the recognition of a special kind of art, romantic art, and it has become necessary to grasp the concept and nature of the beautiful in a deeper way than was possible for those theories. Bound up with this at the same time is the fact that the concept, aware of itself as the thinking spirit, has now recognized itself on its side more deeply in philosophy, and this has thereby immediately provided an inducement for taking up the essence of art too in a profounder way. Thus, then, simply following the phases of this more general development, the mode of reflecting on art, the theorizing we have been considering, has become out of date, alike in its principles and its achievements. Only the scholarship of the history of art has retained its abiding value, and must do so all the more the growth of spiritual receptivity, which I mentioned, has extended people's intellectual horizons in every direction. Its task and vocation consists in the aesthetic appreciation of individual works of art and in a knowledge of the historical circumstances which condition the work of art externally. It is only an appreciation made with sense and spirit and supported by the historical facts which can penetrate into the entire individuality of a work of art. Goethe, for example, has written a great deal in this way about art and works of art. This mode of treating the subject does not aim at theorizing in the strict sense, although it may indeed often concern itself with abstract principles and categories, and may fall into them unintentionally. But if anyone does not let this hinder him, but keeps before his eyes only those concrete presentations, it does provide a philosophy of art with tangible examples and authentications into the historical particular details of which philosophy cannot enter. This is then the first mode of treating art, the one that starts from particular and existent works. From this, it is essential to distinguish the opposite side, namely the purely theoretical reflection, which labors at understanding the beautiful as such out of itself and fathoming its idea. We all know that Plato, in a deeper way, began to demand of philosophical inquiry that its objects should be understood not in their particularity, but in their universality, in their genus, in their essential reality, because he maintained that it was not single good actions, true opinions, beautiful human beings, or works of art that were the truth, but goodness, beauty, and truth themselves. Now, if in fact the beautiful is to be understood in its essence and its concept, this is possible only through the conceptual thinking, whereby the logico-metaphysical nature of the idea in general, as well as of the particular idea of the beautiful, enters conscious reflection. But this treatment of the beautiful by itself, in its idea, may itself turn again into an abstract metaphysics. Even if Plato in this connection be taken as a foundation and guide, still the Platonic abstraction, even for the logical idea of the beautiful, can satisfy us no longer. We must grasp this idea more concretely, more profoundly, since the emptiness which clings to the Platonic idea no longer satisfies the richer philosophical needs of our spirit today. It is indeed the case that we too must begin, in the philosophy of art, with the idea of the beautiful. But we ought not to be in the position of clinging simply to Platonic ideas, to that abstract mode to which philosophizing about art first began. The philosophical concept of the beautiful, to indicate its true nature, at least in a preliminary way, must contain, reconciled within itself, both the extremes which have been mentioned, because it unites metaphysical universality with the precision of real particularity. Only so is it grasped absolutely in its truth. For on the one hand, over and against the sterility of one-sided reflection, it is in that case fertile, since in accordance with its own concept, it has to develop into a totality of specifications, and it itself, like its exposition, contains the necessity of its particularizations and their progress and transition one into another. On the other hand, the particularizations to which a transition has been made carry in themselves the universality and essentiality of the concept, as the proper particularizations whereof they appear. The previously mentioned modes for treating the subject lack both these characteristics, and for this reason it is only this full concept which leads to substantial, necessary, and complete principles. Jai.
Yeah.
Before we go on, did you want to share anything, Didi, or say anything?
Just I think, what I got from that also is, the subject and the presentation. So how, someone might have an idea or a concept and they have a subject, a content of the art, and then the presentation is like the medium, I suppose. That's how I'm interpreting it to be, whether that be, different mediums of art, and also in different styles, like how someone might paint that in a certain style. Like I was just thinking of, someone might have a subject of a sun ray or something, and you might have an artist that exaggerates that style, or does it in like dashes, or uses marks to enhance the colors or something, so you've got the subject and then the presentation, how they go about depicting that subject, and that will have an effect on the overall, also the mood, so it creates more of an atmosphere, or enhances a different type of atmosphere. And then there's quite a lot, actually, different things saying in here. And also I thought it was interesting, we was talking about the universal, which I know Puri Maharaj talks about a lot, and I was thinking in how's that used also in art. And I think it's, sometimes people can find a common universal human experience that they might connect with, that someone might be creating, or have a concept, and it's the concept and that universal experience that's reflected in the subject of art that people can connect with. But that's, again, when it's maybe more of a mundane thing, like a human experience rather than a higher experience of God, which I still think exists. And I guess that's where it comes down to concepts and ideas and what the artist is trying to say. So I think that's what I was getting from that. It's interesting. Right, did you anything yourself get from that?
I think what you said is nice. Basically, he likened the piece of art to the broader message which is being communicated in that art. He likened that to the body and the soul. How the body is the expression of the soul, but the body points away from itself towards the more meaningful thing, which is the soul, which manifests the body. So same way, the piece of art points away from itself to the meaning it's trying to deliver.
Yeah, yeah.
You basically were saying like that, I think.
Yeah. And I think also where he's saying that it should disclose the inner life, feeling, soul, and contact and spirit. And I think you can feel that in art. You really feel that with some art. You really feel that the energy that's been put into it, the human and the soul's interaction, that energy that's transferred into the medium, really it really comes out. You feel it. And that's interesting to see that as as a piece of like maybe two-dimensional work, or just some marks or something. Like for instance, maybe someone like Van Gogh. I don't know if you're familiar with Van Gogh. It's very many people know of him, but he was always searching, quite troubled, and really trying to like create and manifest the beautiful. Like he was seeing beautiful things in the trees and the skies and the light, and you can feel it in his work. You can feel the liveliness, that inquisitiveness in his paintings. So I think something of the artist is definitely transferred into the work. It's definitely extension, a bit like the soul and the body. You're right. Everything we do, everything that's around us is an extension of our inner self, our inner consciousness.
Yeah.
And I think art also expresses that. So it's an extension of that as well.
Sure. I think then the difference would be between like I'm familiar with some of Van Gogh's things, like the Starry Night and things like that. But the difference then I think would be between somebody perhaps like Van Gogh. I don't know so much about his personal life or like his belief, or if he was religious or what his background was, but if he was it's like the concept that we have determines our approach to everything. So if his concept was, I'm trying to manifest the beautiful, and that's what was behind his art, as beautiful as it was, then that will make something completely different from an approach which is thinking, no, I'm already like the beautiful, the absolute is the beautiful, Krishna is the beautiful, right? God is the beautiful, and I'm being expressed by that. I'm the expression of that is coming through me from the absolute, not that the beauty is coming from me. So it's a difference between, self-centered or God-centered. And then I think that will make all the difference in the world with how the actual piece of art comes out.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, Van Gogh was religious on some level, definitely. But I think, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? That some people find, see that they might, nature is always something that artists kind of want to like interpret or absorb. And I suppose in that way it's a bit like, for them maybe it's some sort of appreciation of God's creation, but I guess when someone's acknowledging themselves as a serving agent and how they then produce work as in service to the Supreme, there's slightly different concepts, aren't there? The different angles of appreciating the beautiful, then appreciating the Krishna, and then you've got the mundane, the people that maybe are just living it through or expressing themselves through feeling and sensory feelings and experiences and consciousness. So I suppose this is two different things, and I think art is definitely an extension and a vehicle. Yeah. But through all different ages as well. I think also it talks about like the historical, in history, when you look at different art and how that's been depicted over the time, even when he was talking about, like something like maybe old Indian art, people are familiar with it, but it might be more of a, sort of different cultures that create different types of work, or different styles of work, but it still can be appreciated as beautiful art. Even if they're not understanding maybe the philosophy or the culture. I was going to say, you look over history of art and how religions played a big part in art, and how that's what it was depicting. It was like depicting the stories of different religions. If you look right back to the beginning, it's always depicting that, and it's over time it's sort of come away from religion and depicting God and godly things to more mundane, self-absorbed things. Just as an observation. So I wonder how but he's obviously relating back to the beautiful as Krishna, as God, which ultimately is the beautiful. We're all searching for beauty and love, so it's finding it in that space and expressing oneself within that. What's the word I'm looking for? Within that kind of concept of God.
So I think he's moving on to what is called the concept of beauty of art. So I guess he gets more into his own understanding now, because he was just talking about other people's understanding. So he says that after these preliminary remarks, we now come closer to our proper subject, the philosophy of the beauty of art. And since we are undertaking to treat it scientifically, we have to make a beginning with its concept. Only when we have established this concept can we lay down the division, and therefore the plan, of the whole of this science. For a division, if not undertaken in a purely external manner, as it is in non-philosophical inquiry, it must find its principle in the concept of the subject matter itself. Confronted with such a requirement, we are at once met with the question, whence do we derive this concept? If we start with the concept itself of the beauty of art, it at once becomes a presupposition and a mere assumption. Mere assumptions, however, philosophical method does not allow. On the contrary, what is to pass muster has to have its truth proved, i.e., has to be shown to be necessary. About this difficulty, which affects the introduction to every philosophical discipline considered independently and by itself, you will come to an understanding in a short space. In the case of the object of every science, two things come at once into consideration. One, that there is such an object, and two, what it is. So I think right now what he's saying is we can't just say that art is beautiful. Like that's just like kind of a dogmatic thing. Why is art beautiful? What is beautiful? How do you arrive at that through art in a reasonable, like way that can be shown, not just you have to accept it. So I think that's what he's doing. He's about to do. On the first point, little difficulty usually arises in the ordinary, i.e., physical sciences. Why? It would at once be ridiculous to require astronomy and physics to prove that there are a sun, stars, magnetic phenomena, etc. In these sciences, which have to do with what is present to sensation, the objects are taken from experience of the external world, and instead of proving them, it is thought sufficient to point to them. Yet even within the non-philosophical disciplines, doubts may arise about the existence of their objects, as, for example, in psychology, the science of mind, there may be a doubt whether there is a soul, a spirit, i.e., an explicitly independent subjective entity distinct from what is material. Or in theology, a doubt whether there is God. If, moreover, the objects are of a subjective sort, i.e., present only in the mind, and not as things externally perceptible, we know that in mind there is only what is its own activity has produced. Hence there arises at once the chance that men may or may not have produced this inner idea or intuition in themselves, and even if the former is really the case, that they have not made such an idea vanish again, or at least degraded to a purely subjective idea whose content has no independent reality of its own. Thus, the example of the beautiful has often been regarded as not being absolutely necessary in our ideas, but as purely subjective pleasure, or a merely accidental sense. Our institutions, observations, and perceptions of the external world are often deceptive and erroneous, but this is even more true of our inner ideas, even if they have in themselves the greatest vividness and could carry us away into passion irresistibly. Now, the doubt whether an object of our inner ideas and general outlook is or is not, like the question whether subjective consciousness has generated it in itself and whether the manner and mode in which it has brought it before itself was also in correspondence with the object in its essential nature, is precisely what arouses in men the higher scientific need which demands that, even if we have a notion that an object is or that there is such an object, nevertheless the object must be exhibited or proved in accordance with its necessity. With this proof provided, it may be developed really scientifically. The other question of what an object is sufficiently answered at the same time. However, to expound this fully would take us too far afield at this point, and only the following indications can be given. If the necessity of our subject, the beauty of art, is to be exhibited, we would have to prove that art, or the beautiful, was a result of an antecedent which, considered according to its true concept, was such as to lead on with scientific necessity to the concept of fine art. So he's saying from both sides, if you start with beauty, how does that lead to fine art? Or if you start with art, how does that lead to beauty? But since we begin with art and wish to treat it of its concept and the realization thereof, not of its antecedent in its essential character, the antecedent pursuant to its own concept, art has for us as a particular scientific subject matter a presupposition which lies outside our consideration, and handled scientifically as a different subject matter, belongs to a different philosophical discipline. Thus, the only course left to us is to take up the concept of art lemmatically, which means to assume that it has been demonstrated. So to say, and this is the case with all particular philosophical sciences, if they are to be treated as seriatim. For it is only the whole of philosophy, which is knowledge of the universe as in itself, that one organic totality which develops itself out of its own concept, and which, in its self-relating necessity, withdrawing into itself to form a whole, closes with itself from form one world, closes with itself to form one world of truth. In the circlet of this scientific necessity, each single part is on the one hand a circle returning into itself, while on the other hand, it has at the same time a necessary connection with other parts. It has a backward whence it is itself derived, and a forward to which it ever presses itself on, insofar as it is fertile, engendering an other out of itself once more, and issuing it for scientific knowledge. Thus, it is not our present aim, but the task of an encyclopedic development of the whole of philosophy and its particular disciplines, to prove the idea of the beautiful with which we began, i.e., to derive it necessarily from the presuppositions which antecede it in philosophy and out of the womb of which it is born. For us, the concept of the beautiful in art is a presupposition given by the system of philosophy. But since we cannot here expound this system in the connection of art with it, we have not yet got the concept of the beautiful before us scientifically. What is before us is only elements and aspects of it as they occur already in the different ideas of the beautiful in art, held by ordinary people or have formerly been accepted by them. From this point, we intend to pass on to a deeper consideration of these views in order to gain the advantage, in the first place, of acquiring a general idea of our subject, as well as, by a brief critique, a preliminary acquaintance with the higher determinations with which we will have to do in the sequel. In this way, our final introductory treatment of the subject matter, as it were, an overture to the lectures on the matter at issue, and will tend to provide a general collection and direction of our thoughts to our proper subject. Common, do you want to say anything, Didi? Or should we keep going?
Oh, fine, yeah, keep going.
Common ideas of art. What are we acquainted with at the start as a familiar idea of the work of art? Falls under the three following heads. The work of art is no natural product. It is brought about by human activity. It is essentially made for a man's apprehension, and in particular is drawn more or less from the sensuous field for apprehension by the senses. It has an end and aim in itself. The work of art as a product of human activity. As for the first point, that a work of art is a product of human activity, this view has given rise to the thought that this activity, being the conscious production of an external object, can also be known and expounded and learned and pursued by others. For what one man makes, another, it may seem, could make to imitate too, if only he were first acquainted with the manner of proceeding. So that granted universal acquaintance with the rules of artistic production, it would only be a matter of everyone's pleasure to carry out the procedure in the same manner and produce works of art. It is in this way that the rule providing theories mentioned above on page 15, with their presuppositions calculated for practical application, have arisen. But what can be carried out on such directions can only be something formally regular and mechanical. For the mechanical alone is of so external a kind that only a purely empty exercise of will and dexterity is required for receiving it into our ideas and activating it. This exercise does not require to be supplemented by anything concrete or by anything not prescribed in universal rules. This comes out most vividly when such prescriptions do not limit themselves to the purely external and mechanical, but extend to the significant and spiritual activity of the artist. In this sphere, the rules contain only vague generalities. For example, that the theme should be interesting. Every character should speak according to his standing, age, sex, and situation. But if rules are to satisfy here, then their prescriptions should have been drawn up at the same time with such precision that they could be observed just as they are expressed, without any further spiritual activity of the artist. Being abstract in content, however, such rules reveal themselves in their pretense of adequacy to fill the consciousness of the artist as wholly inadequate, since artistic production is not a formal activity in accordance with given specifications. On the contrary, as spiritual activity, it is bound to work from its own resources and bring before the mind's eye a quite other and richer content and more comprehensive individual creations than formula can provide. Therefore, insofar as such rules do actually contain something specific and therefore of practical utility, they may apply in the case of need, but still can afford no more than specifications for purely external circumstances. Thus, as it turns out, the tendency just indicated has been altogether abandoned, and instead of the opposite, one has been adopted to the same extent. For the work of art was no longer regarded as a product of general human activity, but as a work of an entirely specially gifted spirit, which now, however, is supposed to give free play simply and only to its own particular gift, as if to a specific natural force. It is to cut itself altogether loose from attention to universally valid laws and from a conscious reflection interfering with its own instinctive-like productive activity. Indeed, it is supposed to be protected from such reflection, since its productions could only be contaminated and spoiled by such awareness. From this point of view, the work of art has been claimed as a product of talent and genius, and the natural element in talent and genius has been especially emphasized. In a way, rightly, since talent is specific and genius universal capability, which man has not the power to give to himself purely and simply through his own self-conscious activity. On this topic, we shall speak at greater length later in Part 1, Chapter 3c. Here we have only to mention the false aspect of this view, namely that in artistic production, all consciousness of the artist's own activity is regarded as not merely superfluous, but even deleterious. In that case, production by talent and genius appears as only a state, and in particular, a state of inspiration. To such a state, it is said, genius is excited in part by an object, and in part can transpose itself into the object by its own caprice, a process in which, after all, the good services of the champagne bottle are not forgotten. In Germany, this notion became prominent at the time of the so-called period of genius, which was introduced by Goethe's first poetical productions and then sustained by Schiller's. In their earliest works, for more discussion of these works, see Part 1, Chapter 3, as well as sections on Mohammedan poetry at the end of the Romantic form of art. In their earlier works, these poets began afresh, setting aside all the rules then fabricated. They worked deliberately against these rules and thereby surpassed all other writers. However, I will not go further into the confusions which may have been prevalent about the concept of inspiration and genius, and which prevail even today about the omnicompetence of inspiration as such. All that is essential is to state that the view that even if the talent and genius of the artist has in it a natural element, yet this element essentially requires development by thought, reflection on the mode of its productivity, and practice and skill in producing. For apart from anything else, a main feature of artistic production is external workmanship, since the work of art has a purely technical side, which extends into handicraft, especially in the architecture and sculpture, less so in painting and music, least of all in poetry. Skill and technique is not helped by any inspiration, but only by reflection, industry, and practice. But such skill the artist is compelled to have in order to master his external material and not be thwarted by its intractability. Now further, the higher the standing of the artist, the more profoundly should he display the depths of the heart and the spirit. These are not known directly, but are to be fathomed only by the direction of the artist's own spirit on the inner and outer world. So once again, it is study whereby the artist brings this content into his consciousness and wins the stuff and content of his conceptions. Of course, in this respect, one art needs more than another the consciousness and knowledge of such content. Music, for example, which is concerned only with the completely indeterminate movement of the inner spirit, and with sounds as if they were feeling without thought, needs to have little or no spiritual material present in consciousness. Therefore, musical talent announces itself in most cases very early in youth, when the head is empty and the heart little moved, and it may sometimes attain very considerable height before spirit and life have experience of themselves. Often enough, after all, we have seen very great virtuosity in musical composition and performance accompanied by remarkable barrenness of spirit and character. In poetry, on the other hand, it is quite difficult. It is quite different. In it all depends on the presentation, full of content and thought of man and his deeper interests and of the powers that move him. And therefore the spirit and heart must be richly and deeply educated by life, experience, and reflection before a genius can bring into being anything mature, of sterling worth, and complete in itself. The first productions of Goethe and Schiller are of an immaturity, yes, even of a crudity and barbarity that can be terrifying. It is this phenomenon that in most of these attempts, there is an overwhelming mass of elements, through and through prosaic, partly cold and flat, which principally tells against the common opinion that inspiration is bound up with the fire and time of youth. It was only in their manhood that these two geniuses are natural poets, the first, we may say, to give poetical works to our country, endowed us with works deep, substantial, the product of true inspiration, and no less perfectly finished in form. Just as it was only in old age that Homer was inspired and produced his ever undying songs. Oh. C. A third view concerning the idea of the work of art as a product of human activity refers to the placing of the work of art in relation to the external phenomena of nature. Here, the ordinary way of looking at things took easily to the notion that the human art product ranked below the product of nature. For the work of art has no feeling in itself and is not through and through enlivened, but regarded as an external object, is dead. But we are accustomed to value the living higher than the dead. Yeah, we are accustomed to value the living higher than the dead. That the work of art has no life and movement in itself is readily granted. What is alive in nature is within and without an organism, purposefully elaborated into all its tiniest parts. While the work of art attains the appearance of life only on its surface. Inside, it is an ordinary stone or wood or canvas, or as in poetry, an idea expressed in speech and letters. But this aspect, external existence, is not what makes a work into a product of fine art. A work of art is such only because originating from the spirit, it now belongs to the territory of the spirit. It has received the baptism of the spiritual and sets forth only what has been formed in harmony with the spirit.
Which is what we were saying earlier. Sorry, Prabhu.
Yeah.
What we were saying earlier.
Yeah. Human interest, the spiritual value possessed by an event, an individual character in action, its complexity and outcome, is grasped in the work of art and blazoned more purely and more transparently than is possible on the ground of other non-artistic things. Therefore, the work of art stands higher than any natural product which has not made this journey through the spirit. For example, owing to the feeling and insight whereby a landscape has been represented in a painting, this work of the spirit acquires a higher rank than the mere natural landscape. For everything spiritual is better than any product of nature. Besides, no natural being is able, as art is, to present the divine ideal. Now, on what the spirit draws from its own inner resources and works of art, it confers permanence in their external existence too. On the other hand, the individual living thing in nature is transient, vanishing, changeable in outward appearance, while the work of art persists, even if it is not mere permanence which constitutes its genuine preeminence over natural reality, but its having made spiritual inspiration conspicuous. But nevertheless, this higher standing of the work of art is questioned by another idea commonly entertained. For nature and its products, it is said, are a work of God, created by his goodness and wisdom, whereas the art product is purely human work made by human hands according to human insight. In this contrast between natural production as a divine creation and human activity as something merely finite, there lies directly the misunderstanding that God does not work in and through men at all, but restricts the sphere of his activity to nature alone. This false opinion must be completely rejected if we are to penetrate to the true nature of art. Indeed, over against this view, we must cling to the opposite one, namely that God is more honored by what the Spirit makes than by the productions and formations of nature. For not only is there something divine in man, but it is active in him in a form appropriate to the being of God in a totally different and higher manner than it is in nature. God is spirit, and in man alone does the medium through which the divine passes have the form of conscious and actively self-productive spirit. But in nature, this medium is the unconscious, the sensuous, and the external, which stands far below consciousness in worth. Now in art production, God is just as operative as he is in the phenomena of nature. But the divine, as it discloses itself in the work of art, has been generated out of the spirit, and thus has won a suitable thoroughfare for its existence. Whereas just being there in the unconscious sensuousness of nature is not a mode of appearance appropriate to the divine. Did we stop here for today, Dee?
Yeah, that's fine. Nice reading. Yes, kind of saying what we just discussed a bit earlier. I like that concept where he's saying here also that, not to limit God's creation as just the beauty in nature, but also the beauty in art through the human spirit. God working through as an agent and creating, even enhancing more nature. So beautiful. That concept's lovely.
Yeah.
Nice.
It reminds me of the example Sripad Puri Maharaj uses of, like a little child is asking their parent for some money so that then they can go run and buy the parent a present and then come back and give it back to them. They're
Yeah.
using the parents' own money, and but
Yeah,
still, because the little child used their freedom to express an act of love, even though the resources were the parents the whole time, just
yeah.
that transformation of love and then offering that love, that makes the whole thing, perfect.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I was thinking that as well. It's like, it's sincerity. Like you can have a painting. I think we spoke about this before. You can have a painting that's done by a child that's so sincere and so sweet that makes the artwork successful in a way. It's people, again, it's that universal, it touches on a universal spirit of appreciation. Like everyone can appreciate, they understand that it's a child at a certain age has created something that they've been totally absorbed in, and they've created this piece of work, and it's sincerely. And I think that's also, again, with people's artwork, when we talk about feeling that sense of consciousness or spirit is transformed into the artwork, it's also it's that sincerity also that makes it beautiful. Like something might not be, it was talking about the craftsmanship, like you can have craftsmanship which is very good, but if it's got no purpose, if it's got no if it's just about like a craft, a technique, but there's no spirit there, then it feels empty.
Yeah.
So some people can be born with a gift, but they still have to learn, and it's almost like an emotional intelligence or some sort of form of higher intelligence to be able to utilize the craft to be able to create something beautiful. And I think you put it down to like that sincerity of heart, or I guess again we're talking about different layers of consciousness, but even on a simple form or a universal form of a human experience, people can appreciate and creates beauty or appreciation. But yes, it's been nice reading, interesting reading. So
My humble Dandavad Pranam. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Guru Dev, Srila Acharya Dev, Srila Santa Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Nishinapur Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Guru Ki Jai, Ganga Mayi Amuna Mayi Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Giri Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai, Sham King Radha King Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi, Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Glories to We say Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Puja, Scientific Sankirtan Yagya Puja. Our glories to the worldwide devotees, our glories to the Sambhu devotees, Samabhakti Veda Puja. Nika Gorpani, Hari Hari Hari
Hari
Bol,
Hari
Guide
Bol.
Prince Bhakti Vedanta Institute Puja, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mokh Puja, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Puja.
Jai
Guide
Krishna
Kana Priya
Keshava
Devi
Dasi
Dasi Puja.
Jai. Hari
Hari
Bol.
Bol.
Maharaja takes